Welcome to the Healthy Relationships Initiative podcast. Our goal is to provide information and tools to help you build happier, healthier, and safer relationships of all kinds. To learn more about HRI, please visit www.guilfordhri.org and check us out on social media at GuilfordHRI.
So today's program is called Bonding with Your Child, and we've got our guest here with us, Dr. Esther Lurkes. And my name is Christine Murray, and I am a professor in the UNCG Counseling and Educational Development Department, and I'm also the director of the Healthy Relationships Initiative. And our featured expert today is Dr. Esther Lurkes, and she is a professor in the UNC Greensboro Department of Human Development and Family Studies, as well as she's the Associate Dean for Research in the UNC Greensboro School of Health and Human Sciences. So welcome here today, and I would love to just kind of start off by hearing a little bit about your professional background and especially how you're interested in this topic of bonding with your child.
Well, first, thank you, Christine, for having me here today. I'm really excited to talk about this topic with you and your audience. My interest in this topic is both professional and personal, so I'll tell you a little bit about both. My training is as a developmental psychologist, and I've really come to think about and describe myself as a parenting scholar. So what that means is that I'm really interested in understanding why parents parent the way they do and how that influences their children's well-being over time. And I think truly I've been interested in this my entire life. When I was a child, I grew up in a large extended family. I have 10 aunts and uncles on one side and over 30 first cousins, and I'm one of the oldest.
Oh, wow.
And I was just always very interested in observing the patterns of family interactions, and I really loved how each child was different and the way my different aunts and uncles responded to their children really varied. I was always sitting around the kitchen table with my aunts listening to them tell stories about their children and their parenting, and I think naturally I've just really enjoyed observing that. Then I had the experience of becoming a young parent, and I really felt like the odds were stacked against me as a young parent, and so I deliberately sought out any class related to parenting and child development, and I think that's what ultimately led to me becoming a psychology major in college, and that's where I caught the research bug and really found out, wow, you can study parenting and child development, and for me that was just a perfect fit. And it was in graduate school where I was really fortunate to work with one of the leading experts in parenting and infant development that I discovered the interest that I've considered to pursue until today. Essentially, we were doing a study of temperament and infants developing emotion regulation. And as the research assistant, I was the one who ran our sessions with 100 new moms and their babies. And so we would bring them in, and they would start by just playing with each other to get used to the new environment, but then we would put the babies in distressing situations. And what I really noticed was, you know, for most mothers, they seemed to be pretty similar across those different situations, but there was definitely a handful who seemed really relaxed and comfortable and to enjoy their interactions with their babies in the play setting. But then in the distressing settings, it was almost as if they fell apart. They became really anxious and nervous and responded to their babies in an entirely different way. And that fascinated me, and my advisor said, that's an interesting observation, you should run with it. And that's really what's led to the things I've studied in the meantime.
It's so interesting to hear of your journey and how it was such a personal experience. It's almost like you had a real classroom that you grew up in about parenting, and then it's great that you were able to find ways to really bring that into your professional career too, and just extend your passion for that, which I know we'll hear more as we go throughout our discussion today. So let's go ahead and sort of jump in a little bit to hear more about the work that you do. So you are the director of the Triad Child Study, and so could you tell us a little bit more about this fascinating research that you've been doing about parents and their children?
I'd love to. The Triad Child Study is really what I would describe as my dream study. Thanks to a large grant from the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, my students and I were able to follow a group of 250 new moms from the Greensboro area to really pursue those questions that I first had as a graduate student. So we followed these moms from their pregnancy until their children were 3 years old, and we really had two main questions we were trying to address. The first one was this question of Just how a mother responds when her baby is distressed, so crying or upset, have a special or unique impact on their children's emotional development. We were especially interested in the development of a child's emotion regulation, so how they learn to control their own upset, and then the development of the parent-child attachment relationship. And the question really was, does how a mother responds when her baby is crying predict these outcomes more so than how she's responding in more playful or positive settings with her baby? And our findings to question one really said yes, what mothers do when their babies cry has a unique impact on these outcomes. And that was really new evidence in the field. Most studies of parenting tend to focus on parenting in more positive or problem-solving situations. So that was really exciting to discover that even though babies are upset for a relatively small portion of any day, what we do as parents in those moments really has important significance for their development.
And can you give an example or two of what it looks like for parents who have the more adaptive responses when the baby's crying?
Sure. So you'll hear me use the word sensitivity a lot today, and so if I'm describing a parent as being sensitive, that really means that they're really skilled at noticing their infant signals and responding to them in a way that's appropriate for the child's developmental level, so their age, and also the situation, and that their responses tend to be quick and warm and really in line with the demands of the situation for the baby. So if a baby is crying because they're sad, that often looks like picking them up and comforting them. If a baby is afraid, it could be comforting them or distracting them from what's upsetting them. If they're frustrated, it could be helping them try to solve that problem, or again, distracting them maybe if it's a problem that can't be solved. But a lot of it is about comfort, helping babies learn how to comfort themselves, or if they're too young to do that, really providing that comfort for them.
And you used some really interesting research strategies for that. And just in the spirit of full disclosure, there were a couple times when my own child was a pilot test case for you as you were testing out some of the procedures, and I still remember very vividly what some of those looked like. So maybe could you give an example of one of those, because I think that they were really creative.
And I really appreciated your family assisting us in that way. So, and I'll just share this anecdote. When people ask my children what I do for a living, they tell them that my job is to make babies cry. And I think that's what you're alluding to when you say interesting techniques that we use. So because I have this interest in seeing how moms respond when babies cry, I do deliberately create situations that are stressful to increase the odds that a baby will cry when they're visiting us in the laboratory. So we do things that I would describe as mildly stressing, and they build on things that we know happen in a baby's normal day-to-day life. So babies frequently encounter situations where they're exposed to something that's new or that might startle them. So we show them toys that are a little bit loud or unpredictable that approach them but can't actually hurt them, but we know it's mildly frightening. We also do activities where we try to restrict their movement because we know that's a little frustrating, so we'll hold their arms immobile. And again, we're not hurting them, but we know babies love to move and touch things and explore their world, so being held still for a couple of minutes is pretty frustrating for them. And we use different situations as kids get older, but really just trying to think about what are the natural things that upset children in a normal day.
Yeah, and just it was obviously all very safe and under control. And like you said, it's amazing, I guess, how much you can tell in just a very short period of time. You don't need to put the children in a distressing situation for an hour to see even just a few minutes. You really got a lot of good information out of that.
Absolutely. Each of our tasks are about 4 minutes long, and we do anywhere from 2 to 3 of them depending on the child's age. So it really is just a few minutes, and it's important to point out that the majority of babies calm relatively quickly after those activities, and they don't have a long-lasting effect on them.
Yeah.
So it's important to point that out.
Of course, yeah. It's more memorable probably for the parents than it is for the children.
Absolutely.
So this is really interesting, and I guess it sounds like a lot of this has to do with attachment, which I think is really related to our topic of bonding. And actually in our couple previous relationship booster sessions that we've already done, the topic of attachment has come up. So for those who've been with us in the past, they've heard about that topic too. But let's just talk about these topics, because I know today's topic is bonding with your child, but obviously people who are joining us today also may have heard the term attachment. So can you talk a little bit, what is bonding, what is attachment, are they the same thing, and what do they look like in a parent-child relationship?
I'm really glad that you're asking this question, because I don't think that they're the same thing, and often those words get used interchangeably, so it's good to talk about the ways that they're different from each other. So typically, when we're using the word parent-child bonding, it's more about the parent's feelings toward the child, so their sense of love and connection toward the child, whereas when we're talking about the attachment relationship, it's really the child's attachment to the parent, and that is essentially their sense of whether or not they can trust their parent to meet their needs and keep them safe, which then generalizes to how they think about the world. And that is really based on their history of interactions with each other. And often they might be related, you know, that when you feel a strong connection for your baby, it might be easier to meet their needs, which might lead to a secure attachment. But there are certainly cases where parents feel a very strong emotional connection to their child, but because of other issues, they might struggle in their parenting and could have a hard time developing, leading to that secure attachment that their child feels toward them. So the key piece for the child is really that history of interactions. And people tend to use the term secure or insecure attachment. So a secure attachment typically occurs when a parent responds to a child's needs consistently and appropriately. So if they cry, they comfort them. If they're sad, they let them know they're there. They're just really in tune with those signals and respond in a way that becomes very predictable for the baby. And so the baby comes to understand a couple of different things that are really important. One, they learn that I can count on my parent to meet my needs, and they also begin to develop a sense of, I'm a good communicator. I can express my feelings, and I have some control over the world. And initially, this is really just about the relationship between the two, but it really does lead to a child's sense of themselves and a sense of the world in general. So if they have these early positive interactions that leads to this secure attachment, they tend to think, I can trust my parent, I can kind of have faith that the world around me is a safe place, and I can have confidence in myself. But other infants, unfortunately, have the experience where their needs aren't met consistently, and that can look like a couple of different things. It could be that parents are non-responsive, it could be that they respond harshly or negatively, or it could be that they're inconsistent and a baby just doesn't know, can't predict what the parent is going to be like at any given time. And that tends to lead to an insecure attachment where a child really develops a sense that they cannot trust in their parent to consistently meet their needs. It also affects their sense of self. They start to believe that they don't really have an impact or control on the world around them.
So that's really interesting. So bonding is really referring more to the parent and how they are interacting toward the child, and then attachment is really almost the child's response to the bonding.
So I would modify that just a tiny bit. So the parent, when we talk about parent bonding, it's really about their feelings. So it's really that sense of love, connection, and affection they feel for their child. So it's really about that feeling, whereas the child's attachment is the result of the pattern of interactions that they have with their parents.
Yeah, okay. So, so it's really about the parent. So we're really kind of talking about how parents can adjust themselves and their reactions to the child to really promote that bond with the child.
I think that's a great way of thinking about it.
So how would you describe then sort of, as you know, we're the Healthy Relationships Initiative. So if we're thinking about what does healthy bonding look like between parents and children?
I think that's a great question, because sometimes when we hear the word bonding, it kind of suggests constant closeness, and I think sometimes parents feel pressure that they need to be constantly close and always doing for their child. And it's always important to point out that a healthy parent-child attachment really promotes a child's sense of confidence and comfort in exploring the world around them. So it's not always about being together, and it's not always about doing for the child. but it's about creating this sense of security so a child feels safe exploring the world and doing more on their own. And we've probably all seen examples of this in our daily life and don't even realize it. So you can think of the example of maybe a toddler birthday party. And so you're a parent and you bring your toddler, and maybe there's some children there they know and some they don't know. Maybe there is some kind of party activity going on that's exciting. And it's not unusual to see children first really hover near their parent because they might be nervous and this is a new situation. And if you watch, what you'll see a child with a secure attachment do is they will tend to start to move away from the parent. But they'll check in, you know, okay, I'm kind of approaching the new people and the exciting activity, but they check back. Am I safe? Are you still here? If I get in trouble, are you going to help me? Then they might move a little closer to the situation and further away from the parent. And that's the kind of thing we want to see. That is healthy bonding. So it's not all about, oh, you're scared, stay close to me, always being near me, I'm the one who's going to keep you safe. It's really this balance between recognizing that children might feel afraid or challenged in certain ways, but encouraging them to learn how to deal with that and letting them know that you're there. So I think part of a healthy bond is a parent recognizing that it's not all about them and their child being with them, but it's about promoting their child's autonomy and comfort and sense of safety.
And that seems like something, I know you've talked mostly about really younger children, but that seems like something that could apply in a parent-child relationship even through teenage years and even into adulthood, if you think about it, of that sort of parents, and that obviously is a different kind of bond, but being able, wanting, and it looks different over time, but wanting to have a close relationship, but still give the child, even if the child is a young adult, that freedom to explore and maybe make choices for themselves.
Absolutely. I think that's really true. As children age, they change so much, right? So, I mean, even thinking about from infancy to toddlerhood to preschool, these really big important changes happen, that they become more independent, they want to be autonomous, so they want to do things for themselves, and that's really important for their development. Also, in early infancy, a lot of the attachment is about helping the child cope with their emotions, but as they get older, they get better and better at doing that on their own. When we're talking about a baby, often their parents are the only close relationships they have, but as children get older, they develop more extensive and important peer relationships and other close relationships. So all of this changes, and a healthy parent-child relationship needs to adapt along with that. But some of the core pieces remain the same, that to maintain that healthy attachment over time, a child still needs to have trust that they can turn to you when they need help. That's probably less physical and becomes sort of more distant and more verbal about asking for help, but it's still about needing comfort and support in times of stress. And even how we do that has changed with technology. So, you know, you were talking about college students, and even what that looks like has changed. Probably when you and I were in college, we were calling our parents. Now you really hear about text relationships. But you know, you can think of an example where maybe for parents it's often hard when their children go to college, and maybe as a parent you would feel inclined, I'm going to text them several times a day, but that might not be what the child needs. That's more about filling the parent's need, and I need to feel connected. So again, that's the bond. But to facilitate the child's attachment, it's more about paying attention to how often do they need to check in and being there when they feel the need, but not maybe overdoing it in a way that they feel kind of overly controlled, or that someone's kind of invading in their opportunities to be more of an independent adult.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because it sounds like as a parent then you have your own desire to be bonded with your child, but then you also, I guess, which is, it sounds like a very healthy and natural feeling to want to be connected with your child, and then at the same time really needing to think through some of the implications maybe of that for the child. So you, as a parent, it sounds like there's really two important considerations. One is, are you wanting that connection? Are you working toward that connection? And at the same time, also having that awareness of, are the ways that I'm seeking the connection with my child appropriate for my child's developmental age?
I think that's absolutely true, and that's not always easy.
Mm-hmm.
And on any given day, we do that as parents better than on other days, and I think that's really okay. One thing that is really important to acknowledge is there's no such thing as a perfect parent.
Right.
And I think it's also really important to acknowledge that children learn a lot when we make mistakes. So we might have a parenting slip-up a day when we feel like we didn't handle something as well as we should have, but those create great opportunities for repair and opportunities for children to learn. So to even say, you know, boy, I really did get frustrated with you, or I didn't like the way I handled that with you, I was having a bad day and I shouldn't have taken it out on you. That's reinstilling that sense of safety and security, letting a child know, yeah, I didn't treat you as well as I should have. I'm still here for you. But it's also modeling, when you make a mistake, here's a good way of handling it and making amends with the people in your social world.
And it seems like that's something really important for parents to remember too, that once you have a strong bond or a strong relationship, that you can recover more quickly if you have that strong relationship. So we all, as parents, always are going to make mistakes or slip up or do things where we're not responding the way that, you know, we might want to if we were calm and all the conditions were perfect. But when you have really worked to establish that bond with your child, that it's easier to recover from those things.
I think that's really true. And probably it's because both members of the relationship have faith in one another. Which makes that a little easier than when you have distrust in the other person.
Right. Yeah, it's harder to recover in those situations. So, so let's talk about then. I know you've already mentioned some of this. So, as parents, we do not always 100% respond how we would want to, and sometimes we don't necessarily work on bonding with our child in the way that we want to. So what are some of the big challenges today for parents that can make it hard for them to bond, whatever age their child is?
So I think, you know, again, because we're talking about this is mostly based on the quality of parenting, that anything that could undermine the quality of parenting could play a role here. And that includes a lot of different things. So anything about a parent's characteristics or their well-being at the time. So if they're suffering from depression or another illness that might temporarily undermine their ability to respond to their child's signals, or if they're dealing with a traumatic event that they're trying to cope with, or other life stressors, so dealing with financial insecurity or other kinds of pressures, anything essentially that would feel overwhelming can undermine our ability to be present and responsive for our children, or things that maybe make us feel irritated. So even things like job stress. I mean, if you are feeling very stressed at work and you carry that home, that can undermine your parenting. So it's a long list of things about the parent as an individual, the stressors that they're currently experiencing, the quality of parenting that they experienced in childhood can play a role. So those are some of the more negative aspects, but also sources of support. So if you have a partner or co-parent who's sharing the parenting with you or providing support to you when you're struggling with these other issues or struggling with your parenting, or professional sources of support as well. So education, intervention can all help with parenting. It's also important to recognize that the child's characteristics play a role too. Some children are harder to parent, especially for some parents. So we talk about something called goodness of fit, where it's kind of the match between a parent's preferences and strengths and the child they end up with. And sometimes those are a great fit, and sometimes they kind of are in conflict with one another. So we've talked a lot about responding to emotions. If you have a baby or a child who's really fussy or has what used to be called a difficult temperament, and if you're someone who struggles with emotions, that could be really hard for establishing that parent-child bond and for really parenting the way that you want to.
So it sounds like it would be really important for parents to manage their expectations for what their bond and their relationship is going to look like, because if you're dealing with a major life stressor, or you do have a child that might be, you know, maybe not the goodness of fit that you would hope for, that maybe it's okay to kind of have more realistic expectations about that maybe the bond isn't going to look like what you see in the parenting magazines or the Hallmark cards and things like that.
I think that's absolutely true. I'll share a personal example that I hope will kind of emphasize how all of these different factors work together. So when my second child was born, I was a faculty member at that time. We didn't have family leave yet for faculty. So I was trying to still work full-time, but trying to also be home. And my son cried a lot. He was just shy of meeting the technical condition of definition of colic. So he cried a lot every day. And I had these visions as this parenting scholar that I knew exactly what to do to soothe the baby, and it wasn't working. So I was feeling very discouraged and stressed and tired. But fortunately, my husband was super supportive, and that included things like coming home at the end of the day and just taking our son outside for long walks during the peak fussy period, so I didn't have to hear it. And praising me and reminding me I was doing everything that I really could, and even having the pediatrician let me know it's not that you're doing something wrong. Right. Some babies just go through this phase, and I needed all of that. Even though I knew all of these facts, I needed people to remind me and help me, and I needed to adjust and realize I didn't need to be the one meeting all of his needs. It was okay to share that with my husband, and it was okay not to be perfect.
Yeah, I so appreciate you sharing that example, and I think, I think that it's natural for people to assume somebody who's got a lot of research on this topic or is a family counselor that it must be somehow easy for people like us to, we know the answers and things like that, but there is a real world aspect to all of this that hopefully it's reassuring to people who are with us today or who are watching this that that even people who are experts on these topics really can struggle with it, because there's a difference between the textbook and the research and then what happens in the real world and what that looks like. So just keeping those expectations reasonable seems like a really good tip. So maybe shifting a little bit then, because I think that's a pretty practical application of what we're talking about today. What are some other practical strategies, sort of big picture, regardless of a child's age, that you can offer for tips that parents can do to help strengthen their bond with their child?
I think really paying attention to their signals and their needs is a key. And that can be both understanding what are their broad likes and dislikes, but also in any given moment, what is it that they are trying to signal you that they really need. So again, the focus is on what the child needs, which doesn't always match with what you imagined you would be doing with your child. And I think that's true in any developmental phase, so really paying attention to their interests and their needs. That's really one of the most important pieces. And then responding to those. Which doesn't always mean giving a child what they want. I think that's really important. I've talked a lot about responding to crying and how that's important, but sometimes children cry because they want something that they legitimately can't have, and I want to be clear, I'm not saying give them always what they want. And so limits are a part of what supports a healthy parent-child relationship as well, and that all of that matters.
So I think that's a great point, and it's something that in my own parenting with my children that I face a lot. So, for example, they want to have grilled cheese for dinner, and instead we're having spaghetti and meatballs, and they're not happy about that. So I can't give them what they want all the time. So when I need to say no to them, and I think that is, as you're saying, part of healthy parenting, how can you address that? What would you suggest for parents who have a hard time maybe saying no, but can help them see that you can say no in a way that still promotes the healthy relationship?
Absolutely. I think fundamentally, one of the things we want as human beings is just for other people to recognize and empathize with our emotions, and we can still do that in those situations. So to just say, I can see you're disappointed. I know grilled cheese is your favorite, and I can see you're disappointed or frustrated that we're not having that, and to lay out some of the reasons why, that you need a balanced diet in this case. Also maybe to let them know another time, maybe you can have grilled cheese, but we're not going to do it tonight. But I think the key piece is recognizing that they have emotions and validating those emotions, even if in the end they're not going to get what they want. And I think as adults, that's really a big part of what we want too. Is for someone to just say, okay, I see you're upset, even if they don't agree with why. That's really powerful. to have someone do that for you.
Yeah, my kids, I think they sometimes get on to me when I do that, because I'll say, I know you are upset that you wanted the grilled cheese, and they're like, don't say that, I really want the grilled cheese. But, you know, I think ultimately they can understand that, and it is part of life, really, is to teach kids that they aren't always going to get what they want, because, like you said, as adults, we don't always get what we want either. So helping to see that, but that your world doesn't have to fall apart, the relationship doesn't have to fall apart.
That's right.
Even in the midst of that.
That's right. Absolutely. So limits are important. And I think absolutely spending positive time together is important. It's really important to enjoy one another's company. That's a key piece of both attachment and a bond, is that you enjoy being together. But to really remember that's not all of it, that it's also about how we really respond in those tough moments. So when a child is upset or they're having a hard day, that's really a key piece here, that we listen and respond. So it's really this mix of fun times and how we handle the more difficult times that ultimately promote these healthy relationships.
And I've heard it said like putting chips in the bank, you know, so with those positive times, so playing or connecting around the things that they do like to do, or in those happier times you're depositing, putting those chips in the bank. And then sometimes you need to take out a deposit of the chips, but hopefully if you've built that pile of chips that are there for you, you can take out a few at a time, and they still have that solid base to draw from.
That's a great analogy. I like that.
Yeah, it's helpful too to also remember that, yeah, it's not every moment is going to be this perfect bond. So I'm curious too, because I do think a lot with when we're talking about attachment and bonding, we're really thinking about younger children. So, and I think there's like a really common misconception. I know as my older child has gotten closer and closer to being a teenager, people just say, oh, well, wait till he stops talking to you. Just wait, he's going to stop talking to you. Like, there's sort of an expectation that as kids get older, you're going to necessarily go through a phase where there will really be no bond between the parent and the child. And personally, I don't think that's true. I haven't gotten there yet, so maybe what my life experience will prove me wrong. But tell me, what does it look like to keep a healthy bond with the child as they're sort of approaching older childhood, or even going into the teen years? And and more importantly, sort of not just what does it look like, but what can a parent do?
Sure. Well, first I want to say I really agree with your hypothesis that it's not that a bond just goes away. And there might be given times, it might be a couple of hours, it might be a couple of days, that children go through phases where they don't necessarily want to spend time with us as parents, and that's not a bad thing, again, as long as they know we're available for them if they choose to spend time with us. I think it takes more work as a parent. Again, as your children's social relationships expand, you know, they kind of have these natural preferences that they'd rather spend some time with their friends than necessarily playing a game or doing a fun activity with a parent. And I think it's okay to push on that sometime and to create routines and rituals that you as a family can look forward to. So, you know, you hear some families have family game night, or they have certain hobbies that they engage in together. Maybe it's hiking or playing basketball together. And that, you know, to really try to create those routines so that you have regular interactions you can fall back on. And then it is okay to say sometimes to a child, okay, you've been in your room on your devices for a long time today. It's time to come out and socialize. Let's do something together. And sometimes it's okay to push on that. But we don't need to feel like we need to do that all day, every day, that it really is normative, that they're starting to want to separate a little bit, and that doesn't mean that there's a problem in the relationship. That's really normal, and giving them the space to do that is really healthy for children.
So really kind of, again, going back to that expectations piece, kind of adjusting your expectations. So when they were younger, you might have spent all your time together and doing things, and they were happy to just spend all weekend with you. And as they get older, it's natural that they're going to want to spend time bonding with their friends and bonding with other people in their peer group, let's say, or maybe a coach on a sports team or something. But I like what you're saying about to give parents some permission to say, no, this parent-child relationship is still important too. And sometimes I am maybe going to push it a little bit to make sure that we're still keeping that connection.
Absolutely, and to not be hurt that your child's not the one seeking it out, I think is really important. But there are other little ways that it's helpful as a parent to think about how our children really do show us that we're really important to them, and they're not always obvious. So I think a great example, it's very typical when children come home at the end of the school day, that they're exhausted and they're often cranky. And I hear so many parents talk about how their children sort of blow up at them, or their first interaction sometimes feels really negative. And I often try to remind parents, actually, your child is doing that because they've used a lot of energy being good today, and they know you're a safe space, that they can let this out. I know it doesn't feel good the way that they're doing it, but it's actually an example of their trust and faith and the strength of your relationship that you're the one that they're letting this go in front of. So here, as a parent, we might think, oh, something is really wrong in our relationship. Why does every afternoon have to start this way? It actually could be a sign of how much they trust you.
And it sounds like in those moments it'd be a good idea to remind yourself of that, and then maybe still kind of set the boundaries and say, okay, I can tell you are upset right now, you know, maybe it's okay to be upset, but it's not okay to be mean to me in the process, or why don't you go up to your room and cool down a little bit, and then we can talk later or something. Just really, I think it's helpful to model in those situations, to really model to them that, okay, we've got a strong bond here. Sometimes we are going to have some conflict or intense emotions flare up in the context of the relationship, and we can keep our bond and still set some limits on what that looks like.
Absolutely. And sometimes when a child is really upset, and I'm talking about an older child now, because again, we know they have more ability to control their emotions, but if they are just having what we might describe as a meltdown or a tantrum, where they're just upset, and it's really clear you can't reason with a child in that moment, but again, I think it's okay to say, I can see you're upset, and I'm here to help you, but you have to be ready. Let me know when you're ready. So again, that's acknowledging the emotion, and it's giving them the space to kind of decompress on their own, but giving the signal over and over again, I'm here for you when you need me, but also saying there's limits on how it's appropriate to be treated.
Yeah, I think that's the message that is so important for kids as they become teenagers and even into adulthood. Like, I'm here for you, and what that looks like may be different than when you were a baby, but that I'm here for you, I'm in your corner, I'm on standby, basically, and still working to kind of keep that relationship going, but I'm here for you, I'm in the background waiting for you. And that is really great with the connection as they get older. So what about when there is some sort of rupture in the bond between a parent and a child, and let's just say whether they just got off to a rough start when they were younger, or maybe it's a parent who was under some really intense stress, either in the early stages, or let's say the parent goes through a phase where and maybe it's been 6 months or a year, and there's the relationship is kind of off. So how can you kind of repair a bond when there's problems within it?
So can I talk first a little bit about the change and then come back?
Sure, yeah.
Because I think it really is important to point out that relationships can change over time. So often the quality of a relationship between a parent and a child, so whether it's the parent's bond to the child or the child's attachment to the parent, often that's stable over time, mostly because the quality of parenting tends to be pretty consistent over time. And I'm not just talking about, there are blips from day to day or month to month, but on average, there's a lot of consistency, but there can be change in both directions. There's lots of evidence that that's true. So there can be examples of children and parents that struggled in their early relationship. You can think of an example, maybe if a mother had postpartum depression, just as an example, and so in maybe the early months, she was just emotionally struggling to meet the child's needs. But after recovering from that, maybe receiving intervention, you can see an improvement in the quality of parenting, and the relationship will recover. There's lots of examples of that. There's also examples where it can change in the opposite direction, that you can have a parent and child that start out with a healthier, secure relationship, again, because of that good quality interaction, but then if the parent or family is suddenly under a lot of stress and the parenting changes, and I'm talking about a consistent change. So I'm glad you brought up the example. So if it's been a couple of months or a year, that's when you're more likely to see a change in the quality of the attachment. So there is stability, but there's lots of room for change. Change can be positive or negative, and change can happen multiple times. We're talking about a lifespan relationship between a parent and a child, so it can fluctuate more than once over the course of that relationship. So I do think it's important to just acknowledge that change is really possible.
Yeah.
Repair is very possible, and I think that is, I'm really glad that you used that word. The relationships can always change for the better. It takes work, though. So I keep going back to the quality of parenting, and that's what's really going to make the difference for a child, is to feel that a parent is consistently there for them, that they're affectionate and warm and meeting their needs, and that's what they can expect on a day-to-day basis. Mm-hmm. And sometimes parents need help getting there, and sometimes children need help accepting that, especially if it's been a long period where they've experienced something differently. Mm-hmm. So sometimes families need professional support for that, and we have lots of available supports in the community. Sometimes they just need something like this, a relationship booster, where they just need a reminder about how to improve daily interactions. But repair is always possible. It just takes a lot of work and maybe some skill building to get there.
Right, so a parent might think about what areas might they be experiencing some challenges, and might they need to learn some new things or kind of change course if they've been going one direction. I think there's a lot of hope in that message too, that if there is some sort of rupture or break, or it's just not where people want it to be, that they can do things differently and that it can lead to a repair in that connection.
It is important to acknowledge that that takes time, and I think if you're a parent and you've really made an active commitment, I want this to improve, not to get discouraged if it takes a little while, to remember that from the child's perspective, now they're feeling a little bit of doubt, and it's going to take some time for them to feel trust again. So not to expect the change overnight, and it's pretty typical in these situations for children to test. So if a parent has really worked hard to improve their parenting, children will test those boundaries because they're wondering, is this a real change, or is this going to go back to the way it used to be? So in clinical work, people often describe that there's this period where things seem like they're getting worse, and it's really important for parents to know that so you don't give up, because you might think, oh, this is backfiring, nothing's working, that kind of a period of enhanced negativity is pretty common before you start to see the change.
But it could be a real sign of progress.
It could be a sign of progress if you know to think about it that way.
Yeah, well, I think that's very encouraging, just to remind people that that they can change, that it's not something that's set in stone, that if there are struggles in that relationship, that it can be turned around. I want to make sure that we leave time for questions. Do we have any questions that have come through?
We do. One of our participants has asked, is bonding with your child more difficult for parents who haven't given birth, such as adoptive parents? And do you have tips for when initial bonding occurs later in life?
That's such a good question. I will say, mammals in general are so interesting that there's all these biological processes that built in that facilitate bonding. So our hormones change over the course of pregnancy. There's a hormonal rush during childbirth. If you're breastfeeding, there's hormones linked with that people call the love hormones that really facilitate bonding. So there's a lot biologically that facilitates bonding. But the research shows that in cases of adoptive parenting, foster parenting, that strong bonds really are developed even without that biological connection. So first of all, it's absolutely possible, and it might take time, a little more time to get there, but it's very possible, and all of the things we've talked about up to now are the key. Consistency in responsiveness to the child's signals and needs. Now, depending on how someone comes into the parenting role, we were just talking about children testing their limits, and so they're bringing their history with other caregivers with them into a new relationship. So when we're talking about adoption, if it's early in infancy, then there's not a lot of that history, but if it's later in a child's life, often there are histories of trauma or difficult interactions that have already affected how a child is thinking about the world and others. And so to recognize everything we just talked about, so here you are as the new parent trying to instill this positive relationship, that it's very typical for children to test the boundaries because they're bringing with them that history, and to really know that that's common and that there's great possibility to work through that and establish that positive relationship.
And that, it sounds like, especially for those parents to remember, those guardians to remember, that it might really get worse at first. Absolutely. And that is even more of a sign of progress potentially, because that testing could even be exacerbated even more. And really, again, I would go back to that sort of expectations piece too, that if somebody's going into that situation, how important it would be to go into it expecting that you're not going to come together. There might be a short little honeymoon phase, but there may not even be a honeymoon phase, but just having the expectation that it's going to take some time, it's going to take hard work. There might be some real challenges that we have to go through before we get to that point.
And I think seeking support and knowledge specific to that situation can really help. And it's just so useful to know you're not alone when you're encountering that, and maybe to hear from others who have gone through that and come out on the other side, so that you have reminders that you can do it as well.
Yeah, and I would just add too, and you mentioned the professional support too, I think anything like parenting classes, parent educators, counselors, family counselors, or individual counseling for the parent, online resources, reading books, maybe a case manager. So there's a lot of different resources that people could draw upon, especially if they're having a hard time managing some of that on their own.
Absolutely.
And now we have a two-part question regarding the use of technology. Technology is a huge part of the life of adults and children. How do you see that affecting the bond and attachment of parents and children? And what are your thoughts on families setting limits on technology use to foster parent and child bonding?
Oh, these are such great questions. And I think how I think about answering this depends on what ages we're talking about. When we're talking about older children, this was really an eye-opener for me. I used to hate texting, and boy, the world has changed. And I remember when my oldest went to college, it was clearly her preferred way of communicating. And I remember complaining to my colleague, these are such poor quality interactions, they're just short, we're not really gaining anything. And she was actually studying how parents and college-age children were communicating via text, and was able to tell me about how this was really the preferred communication of children, and how there was all kinds of evidence that texting with their parents made them feel connected. And so I had to wake up and realize, oh, okay, I was making it about me. Texting is not my preferred mode of communication, but if I did what I just said, follow her lead and take this as an opportunity, now I'm much better at texting and we continue to text. So it can really be very valuable in maintaining those check-ins and being able to communicate with one another. And she often texts me when she's having a problem, and I'm able to immediately respond and offer support or comfort or advice depending on what the situation is. So I think it's really facilitating the maintenance of our relationship over time. And it took a little while to get me there. I was a little old-fashioned. So I think that can be very positive. But I also think, especially when we're talking about younger children, that technology can interfere. I just heard the term technoference in the last year, which is the idea that when individuals are together, and this could be a romantic couple, or it could be parents and children, it can be friends, that if you are constantly interrupted because you're paying attention to your devices, that it interferes with the quality of the social interaction that's happening. So I do think if we're talking about parents with their young children, and young children tend to have quick and varying needs that are very momentary, that they need quick responses, and if you're distracted by your technology, you might be missing important moments that your child needs you. So I think, and when I'm at places like the Science Center or the park and looking around, because that's what I like to do, I see this happening. I see children playing and saying, hey mom, look at me, and the parent doesn't look up because they're texting. Again, if that's only once in a while, that's okay, but if that's a child's most common experience, that's potentially hurtful. So I do think there's potential that technology could disrupt and play a negative role, and I think it's great to set limits for ourselves, whether it be, okay, the dinner table is a time we don't have this, or if we're going to the park, maybe this is a time that's about us, so we're not going to do it. And then thinking about as children get older, you know, your question about our children who are these preteens now who don't want to hang out with us, I think putting limits on their technology helps with that a little bit too. So I think when they start to get bored, that's when they come out of their rooms and realize that there are other members of the family that they can interact with, and that's really good for maintaining the bond as well.
Sounds like it's a lot about modeling yourself as a parent, really being careful with your own technology use and thinking about how that impacts your relationship with the child and with others they might see too, and then also helping the child think critically about how the use of their technology, which again might look different for a very younger child, but especially as they're moving into adolescence, to really help them to think carefully about that, about what the role is on their relationship.
Absolutely. I was just talking to a friend last night who was saying that she had taken away her child's internet privileges for the week because of a misbehavior. So it had really been intended as a punishment, but she said, we just had the best week together because we're spending so much time together. So I really think that speaks to what we're saying.
Yeah, definitely. I think just being mindful of it is really important. I'm sure, like me, you're on a college campus, and I'm sure you see walking around the campus, just like I see, you'll see two college students walking together, and one of them's texting, the other one's talking, but they're friends and they're walking together. And so even just thinking about what impact is that having on your bond with the other person, and you're sort of bonding with the person you're on the phone with or that you're texting with, but you're missing out on the bonding with the person in the real world. So it's a real issue. I'm glad that somebody brought that question up.
You mentioned goodness of fit earlier. Can you talk more about that and give advice to parents who may be struggling to connect with their child early on, and maybe even advice for families or their partner who sees the struggle and wants to support?
Yeah, so goodness of fit, it is really hard if a parent is not feeling that sense of fit. And as a parent, you wouldn't even be using that term, right? You'd be trying to figure out why am I struggling here? And it goes back again to this idea of expectations that many of us, before we become parents, have ideas of what our children are going to be like, and then when they arrive, they're not like that. Like, I didn't expect that I was going to have this baby that cried for hours every day. So first, recognizing that your expected child versus the child that you have might be different, and really thinking about that and trying to pay attention to, okay, what is my child like? What's their personality? What's their temperament? When they're behaving in a way that I'm having a hard time with, what is it that they're trying to signal to me? So the more you can try to take their perspective and think about that and reflect on, okay, in that moment, what is it that they're really looking for from me, that just some awareness and reflection about that can really help. But I recognize that's easier said than done, because parenting is happening quickly. It's all day, every day, and we don't always feel like we have time to pause and really be thoughtful about what we're doing. And that's where partners can be really helpful, but that's a fine line too, because support can sometimes feel like criticism if it's not offered in a really careful way. So I think it's really good for co-parents to try to have open communication with each other, but it's probably better, rather than saying, I see you're having a really hard time right now, so I'm going to help in this way, to just do it without making some kind of statement that sounds kind of judgmental or evaluative. So I'm a fan of direct communication, but I think there has to be care in terms of how that happens so that one parent doesn't feel criticized. And it's important to recognize that a child might fit better in some ways with one parent than the other, but to also recognize that often changes over time as children develop new interests, or you'll often hear parents say things like, I used to be the favorite, and now all of a sudden he's all about his dad, and I don't understand that. And I always try to frame that as, well, now that's a really positive opportunity for your child and partner to spend some special time. Maybe it's a great time for you now to have some time for yourself that you didn't before, and I predict it's probably going to change, and it's going to switch back to you in a couple of months. And you might even get to the point where you feel like, why is this child all about me? I wish sometimes they would want the other parent. And parents almost always come back to me and say, yeah, that turned out to be true. So this can kind of ebb and flow over time.
I think those are also really good opportunities to remember that your child is not a mini you, that your job as the parent is to help your child become the unique person that they are, and encouraging them in that. And so in some ways I think it can be frustrating to have those experiences of feeling like, oh gosh, something feels a little off, but then it's helpful to remember that actually that's a positive thing, because you don't get to tell your child exactly who they get to be. You want to, of course, influence them, but those are just really great opportunities to remind yourself, my job is to help them become the best version of who they're going to be, and to help them, and what can I learn from this difference that's emerging between us? whether it's a longer term or a more immediate. So I know that we're getting close to the end of our time, and just really quickly before we totally wrap things up, I'd love to hear sort of a takeaway point that you hope people will have gained from participating in this session, or I should say, on a real practical level. Obviously, bonding is a very lifelong process, but if you could just give a parent one thing that they could go and do and that might help foster a bond, like what can I do when I go home today and I see my child? What could I do? Or not just me, but the people who are with us today.
So I have 3 take-home points.
Go for it.
Can I go from 1
go
to
for
3?
3.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think the key, so if I had to say one, it really is about following your child's lead, paying attention to their signals and trying to respond. I do think that really is the key, but I want to add kind of 2 caveats. One is to remember it's not always just about the fun stuff, and that's often what people focus on. Are we having fun together? Are we being warm and affectionate? But to remember for a child, it's how we respond to them in the hard times. It's especially important in terms of how they feel about their relationship with us and how they're learning how to control their emotions. So respond to their signals, including their signals when they're upset and having a hard time, that's really key. And I would also really emphasize that the quality is more important than the quantity, so that it's not about having more and more time with your child. It's about making sure that the time you're having together is high quality. And that's not about being perfect, because we've talked again about all the opportunities and benefits of repair. But it's really about paying attention to them, who they are, what they're needing, and doing your best to meet those needs if it's appropriate. And when it's not appropriate, using those as opportunities for them to learn.
The thought popped in my head while I was listening to you that it's about being present and not being perfect. And so that seems like something that people can really remember as a key takeaway from today, to think about. It's about being intentional, being there for your child, responding to them, but that you don't have to be perfect, and that there is really no such thing really as a perfect bond between a parent and a child, but it's something that evolves over time, and it sounds like that's something that we've really touched on a lot today.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks to everybody for joining us, and thank you especially. It's been a really great conversation, and just the wealth of knowledge that you have on this topic, both from your research, and then, of course, I especially appreciate you sharing your personal experiences with the topic, too. Is always, I think, very helpful for people to hear that if they're struggling with these issues, that they're not alone, and especially somebody who's such an expert on the topic can also face the challenges, too. So. We hope that what everybody's heard here today has been something that's helpful and that will help you and your relationships, and that you can apply the information to your life. We do welcome your feedback, and Camilla has posted the link in the chat box, so please just click that real quickly. It's designed to take only a couple minutes, but to give us some feedback about the program so that we can constantly be improving these. And our next program will be on Friday, February 15th at 12 o'clock, and the topic of that presentation will be on healthy dating relationships, and it'll feature Robin Campbell, who is the director of the Counseling Center at Bennett College. So with that, we'll sign off, but we hope that this program has certainly helped you on your way toward building happy, healthy, and safe relationships.